Hi, students. It's Dr. Newmark here. I hope you're having a very nice week. All right, I can't believe we're so far into the semester, but we're going to jump into this video. The two readings were dense in their own way, and I'm probably just going to scratch the surface. So let's see what we can do. Okay, so we're going to look at Keith Kenney's Building Visual Communication Theory and Laurie Gries's On Rhetorical Becoming. Laurie Gries is very well known in our field right now. She has a well-regarded, award-winning book. As a scholar of new materialist rhetoric, she's among the very best known. So if you hadn't yet heard of her work, it's appropriate that you have done so now. Okay, so we're going to start with Keith Kenney. Like a few of the other readings in this class, this one is pretty old and it shows its age in a pretty obvious way sometimes. Nevertheless, I have retained some rather old texts in this class just because A, some of them I think are quite comprehensive, and B, I think it's important to show kind of the span of engagements with visual rhetorical theory. Actually, the way that these concepts have been engaged across disciplines, from communication studies to rhetoric to art history to graphic design. So that's the justification for that. But let's jump into Kenney. This chapter is rather long, this article is rather long, and it covers a huge swath of content as he sort of tracks through ways in which visual persuasion has been theorized over time, and he uses a great variety of different cases. So I'm just, again, going to scratch the surface of those. So Kenney writes that rhetoric traditionally was considered to be public, contextual, and contingent. So this traditional perspective was, starting in the 1970s, applied to visual forms of communication. We've talked about how rhetoric has historically been tied to public oral discourse, but the term has increasingly been used to analyze artifacts or pieces of visual persuasion. So that's what we've been doing for the last 11 weeks. So how are these 5 dispositions relatable to visual arguments? Aristotle's 5 canons are invention, disposition, style, memory, and delivery. Many of you are probably familiar with these already if you're in our rhetoric and writing program, but Kenney invokes them in this essay as he's sort of laying the groundwork. So the idea that Kenney shares is one that we have discussed concerning memes. Quote, cartoons work to the extent that readers and cartoonists share cultural symbols. There's so much more that I want to say about this, especially concerning Kenney's discussion of cartoons in his chapter, but I'm just going to use this one panel from, or series of images from Peanuts to make this case. And I shared this when I taught this course in Finland, and it was relatable to me because I understood the cultural symbols, but it was less relatable to Finnish students. And some of you come from other countries and it may or may not be relatable to you. Do you share this symbolic vocabulary or do you not? So we have in the first slide, something strange is happening to me, Charlie Brown. And he says, I keep hearing an E flat in my head over and over. I believe that's Schroeder there. And then he keeps walking, he walks off the mound and Charlie Brown says, he's lucky. I keep hearing ball 4. So Schroeder obviously is distracted. He's a musician. He keeps hearing E flat, which is his sort of vocabulary from his musician discourse community. He's distracted from the baseball game. And Charlie Brown is like a little frustrated with Schroeder as the catcher. And he says, he's lucky. I keep hearing ball 4. So this is a commentary, I guess, on Charlie Brown's pitching efficacy. But it shows the disjuncture between what they are hearing in their vocabularies and their discourse communities and what they're supposed to be united in the pursuit of at this time, which is the baseball game. So there's a whole lot encoded in these 4 images and the simple set of words that is being used here. But it sort of flattens out or takes pieces out of the larger conversation. And if you understand the larger history of Peanuts and who the characters are and what their passions and interests are, as well as understanding baseball and what ball 4 means, then you can make the whole story make sense. You can make this rather spare visual message make larger sense to you. It relies upon, to do its work, it relies upon cultural symbols. And in this case, cultural terminologies. Okay, so I've included here yet another Finnish example of the Kalevala, which I have mentioned on a number of occasions. But I'm just going to quickly mention something that's really sort of niche and funny. So if you are able to see this slide presentation well, and you look at the bottom, you'll see a familiar figure. You'll see some characters from the Disney Donald Duck cartoon enterprise, I suppose. So you see Donald Duck. I think you actually see, I don't know who the guy in the top hat is. I don't know Donald Duck very well, but is that Scrooge McDuck? I don't know. But then you see Donald Duck next to him. But the larger set of panels has to do with the Kalevala, and it's written in Finnish. I will not read it to you. But Donald Duck, for some reason, and I invite you to go down a Reddit rabbit hole on this topic if you wish, but Donald Duck is beloved in Finland. He is called Aku Ankka. And so an American cartoonist named Don Rosa, who for Disney has been drawing Donald Duck for a long time. This guy's in his mid-70s now. He has drawn a Kalevala featuring Donald Duck. So it's this really interesting collision of the Finnish epic, sort of the genre of the print cartoon, and as well as the media cartoon, and the like American history of like Disney and like the sort of Donald Duck phenomenon. So all of these things collide together. It's like sort of a mashup between meaning making across cultural contexts. So I just wanted to show you this one page, mostly to make you scratch your head, but to think about the ways that meaning making emerges out of different visual cultural vocabularies being combined in a certain way that is only meaningful if you are in-grouped in that context. So I'll just leave that to the side for right now. Okay, so Kenney continued. So questions concerning whether visuals can argue. This is a question that we've engaged already over the last several weeks. So he writes, Birdsall and Grork, however, write that if visuals lack explicit meaning, then so do words. It's a really compelling idea. Kenney explains that visuals can argue, that's his claim, when they, number one, provide reasons for choosing one way or the other, two, counter other arguments, perhaps via substitution or transformation, three, cause us to change our beliefs or to act. That's sort of the litmus test of any persuasive communication. So the examples concerning the persuasiveness of Dan's campaign against billboards is very dated, right? Can you think of a way to apply it to digital advertising? So he tells the story of Dan, and I've always sort of thought this is a story about himself. He is Dan, but anyway, can you think of ways that people have used digital media, either in political contexts or in other contexts, to be persuasive through image manipulation? He talks about how this is done in these billboard advertisements and creating a connection between billboards and litter. That's the basic premise, or litter on a stick. That's the premise in the article. So clearly, the understanding of rhetoric has expanded to include not only oratorical persuasion. We've covered this over and over again. So what do you think of this configuration? I think you're all pretty much on board with that. So he writes, rhetoric considers how people use symbols to alter perception, to reinforce and channel belief, to initiate and maintain action, as well as to foster or undermine a competing ideology. With a symbolic perspective, the scope of rhetoric expanded to include all forms of communication, including gestural, visual, musical, and dance. I love the inclusion of dance here. I have a long history in ballet, and I'm really fascinated by the way that dance is invoked in the conversation about symbolic meaning making. I could involve some very avant-garde examples, such as Rite of Spring, which is a famous example of a dance that used a specific visual vocabulary, a certain bodily arraignment, as combined with symbol systems to really shift shift the conversation around the way in which ballet makes meaning and is an aesthetically pleasing art form. I put air quotes in there. I don't know if you could see them in the little box. Okay. All right. So I included this example here, which you'll probably all recognize, and I'll get to why I included it here in just a minute. So epideictic rhetoric is another thing that Kenney involves here. This chapter really has so much in it. I mean, we could spend weeks kind of taking out the different subsections and analyzing them. But anyway, epideictic discourses work, he writes, by unifying audiences around a common set of values. These cliches, stereotypes, and myths create a favorable, reassuring impression through associations. The resulting images are pleasurable because they are so effortlessly recognizable. They reinforce conventional images of social reality and one's place in it and are perceived to represent truths. So here we have this Nike advertisement with Colin Kaepernick, and it says, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And I looked up the ways in which advertising today involves epideictic rhetoric. And this is one of the things I found, and it was an undergraduate student's visual rhetoric portfolio. And in my PowerPoint slide deck, I have the citation. So I'm happy to share it with you if you're interested in looking at it. But this was an undergraduate student's visual rhetoric portfolio from Penn State. And this student explains or is making an argument that this advertisement is a case of epideictic rhetoric. And he makes the case this way, or she makes the case this way, or they make the case this way. So, quote, within the essential guide to rhetoric, epideictic speech is classified as speech that displays the qualities of something to assign praise or blame. So Lundberg Keith, that's who wrote that. So using this classification, epideictic speech can be tied directly to Nike's image of the Kaepernick ad, as the sole purpose of the ad is to force customers to assign a binary meaning to Kaepernick's actions. So with the praise blame paradigm, maybe you've studied epideictic rhetoric in other classes. That's generally the construct in which it is used, generally in celebratory or praise-related contexts. But in this case, this student really drills down into this construct of the binary. And that is very much reflected in this ad. Believing in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, it's either an all or nothing paradigm. And that is what belief does. You either, it's like Kierkegaard's Night of Faith, which I won't go down that rabbit hole, but you're willing to sacrifice everything for what you believe. You either achieve everything or you achieve nothing. It sets up this paradigm. And so this student is arguing that this image captures that whole dynamic here. That is an epideictic rhetorical move. I'll just leave that there and see what you think. Okay, so Kenney continued. So Edwards and Winkler on visual ideographs. This is another big concept that he uses. So an ideograph is an image that transcends the specifics of its immediate visual references and through a cumulative process of visual and symbolic meaning, rhetorically identifies and delineates the ideals of the body politic. So we have here this Iwo Jima image, a famous image. So according to McGee, a visual ideograph has the following features. And as I'm reading these, you can look at this image and see whether you think that it applies. So number one, it must be an ordinary image found in political discourse, and both the elite and the non-elite must be influenced by the image. It must be a high-order abstraction representing collective commitment to a particular yet ill-defined normative goal. 3, it must warrant the use of power and guide behavior into acceptable and laudable channels. And 4, it must be culture-bound. So as I sit here and I speak to you, I think of many more contemporary examples of very culturally defined and politically powerful photos from more recent years. And I wonder whether they also can align with this sort of like ideographic vocabulary. What would an example from your community be, or one that you might think of? I have one right in my mind, but I hesitate to share it because I don't know whether you think it would rise to these same set of 4 criteria. So I'll let you think of your own. Okay, So Kenney concludes, disputing Perlmutter's analysis, that from a rhetorical perspective, which emphasizes a ritual model of communication and a social construction of reality, these images seem to have both immediate and long-lasting effect upon citizens and leaders. Now, Kenney wrote his article decades ago, and he thinks that these have immediate and long-lasting effects upon citizens and leaders. Now, on the left, we have Ken Carter's Vulture and the Little Girl. This was very well known during my childhood. And on the right, you have this Tiananmen Square famous image, Jeff Widener's Tank Man. So you all are a lot younger than me. I'm curious whether you are familiar with these images. He refers to both of them. Sometimes in these PowerPoints, I try to actually show you the images that the scholars are writing about, because you may not be able to call them to mind right away. But I'm wondering what you think of Kenney's disputation of Perlmutter's analysis, and when you think about these ritual models of communication and social constructions of reality. Okay, but in the interest of not having this video last forever, we're going to jump to Lori Gries. There she is, on new materialism and rhetorical becoming. So this means that all things have equal ontological footing and can thus become. So non-human things, such as new media images, also experience rhetorical becoming, and that their potential to spark identification, persuasion, and collective action is constantly materializing via their multiple and diverse encounters. So I think when you see the Obama Hope images that she built her argument around, you'll be able to think of many other cases in which an iconic image has become something of its own. It's taken on, as it were, a life of its own. You have probably seen, this is another image by this same artist, the Andre the Giant image that has also come upon us and developed a life of its own. You can look that up. I know other almost sort of like pop cultural images over time that have taken on a life of their own, but she believes that these function in this way because of their visual capacities and their unique non-human ability to become. Of course, the subject of this piece of art is a human, right? Barack Obama, but the image itself has become in its own way. So she asks, how ought scholars think about digital rhetoric in the visual age? So this is her book here on the left. I've included an article version for you all in the class, but this is her book, Still Life with Rhetoric, and it won all kinds of awards. Pretty important book. Okay, so she continues. So what do you make of this? What do you take this to mean? Quote, acknowledging an image's distributed ontology and accounting for its rhetorical transformation helps scholars move from iconoclasm to iconophilia, a respect for not only an image itself, but also its movement, its transformations, and its ability to construct publics. And she's quoting from Finnegan and Kang there. So on page 157, Gries also offers a very specific definition of becoming, emerging out of the work of theorists Deleuze and Guattari. What do you make of it? And in fact, I went to my copy of A Thousand Plateaus and I looked again at their configuration of becoming. And I just included one quote here. I could have spent like hours on this again because I realized some things that it discusses that I had forgotten over the years since I like reread it. But if you haven't read A Thousand Plateaus, best of luck. I mean, it's super, super interesting, very dense, kind of all over the place with its references, but super important. Lori Gries relies on it heavily in her construction of becoming. So they write in A Thousand Plateaus, quote, we believe in the existence of a very special becomings animal. They're specifically talking about that in this passage, becomings animal. So traversing human beings and sweeping them away, affecting the animal no less than the human. From 1730 to 1735, and this is a quote either from Bergson or Levi-Strauss, I don't remember exactly. So all we hear about are vampires. So from 1730 to 1735, all we hear about are vampires, end quote. So structuralism clearly does not account for these becomings, since it is designed, structuralism is designed precisely to deny or at least denigrate their existence. A correspondence of relations does not add up to a becoming. When structuralism encounters becomings of this kind pervading a society, it sees them only as a phenomenon of degradation, representing a deviation, sees them only as a phenomenon of, I'm sorry, this is a repeated line, sees them only as a phenomenon of degradation, representing a deviation from the true order and pertaining to the adventures of a diachrony or diachrony. I frankly don't know how that word is said. Some of you probably do, but I don't. But anyway, so in a very long section of their book, they talk about this concept of becoming, and they really are trying to detach it from these dyads, these binaries, binaristic ways of thinking. It's more of a spectrum, not going from perhaps human to non-human, but a spectrum of moves in between. This quote here from 17 to 1735, we hear all we hear about are vampires, which is a human who is no longer bounded by the constraints of mortality, but has entered the domain of the undead, as if dead and undead are two parts of a binary. Instead, it becomes the spectrum evinced through the bodily enactment of the vampire. They talk about animals in this chapter, and we can think about this concept as well with the wolf and the werewolf. It's very appropriate in Halloween season, but go check out the original text if you're interested, because it does really bring forth more of a nuanced understanding of what Gries is talking about in terms of non-human visual enactments having an ontology of their own, having a sense of being of their own, moving in the world of their own, like sort of on their own power. So I did not find any New Mexico iterations of the Obama Hope image. Do you know of any? I'm curious. You see on the cover of her book many different versions of that image. So, quote, she writes, in this distributed sense, Obama Hope has been able to maintain a sense of whole, as evident by its recognizability across these actualizations. However, with time and space, its reality has become increasingly distributed, as each of its actualizations has taken on a life of its own and shaped collective life in divergent ways. So differing speeds and differing spatial configurations of new media images is the idea I want to end with today. These differing speeds, differing spatial configurations. The Obama Hope example is a really iconic one, but think to yourself of others. And on that note, I'm going to end this video, and I will post it to our Canvas site and to my YouTube channel. And I will see you again. I say that at the end of every video, but again, I won't see you, but you will see me next week in next week's video.